I am 73 years old and I am the only living human who has had a full conversation with a Bigfoot. Not grunts, not gestures, not primitive communication. A conversation, in English, with grammar, vocabulary, philosophical concepts, and a perspective on humanity that was so profound it shattered everything I thought I understood about intelligence, consciousness, and our place in the world. His name was Nathaniel, or at least, that's the closest approximation my human mouth could make of the sound he used to identify himself. He stood before me on a September morning in 1979, 9 feet tall and covered in silver-gray fur, and said in perfect accented English, "I have been watching your species for 347 years, and I have concluded that you are the loneliest beings on Earth. You have forgotten how to hear the world speak. I would like to teach you, if you are willing to learn." What followed was 6 hours of conversation that I have replayed in my mind every single day for 45 years. He told me things about his species that anthropology never dreamed. He told me things about my species that made me weep. He told me why they hide, why they watch, and why, despite everything humans have done, they still have hope for us. The story I'm about to tell you is almost impossible to believe. I know that. I've spent 45 years not telling it because I knew how insane it would sound. But I'm dying now. Cancer. Maybe 6 months. And before I go, I need to testify. I met a being more intelligent than any human I've known, more articulate than most professors I've studied under, more compassionate than any priest I've confessed to. And he wasn't human. He was something older, something wiser, something we've spent centuries trying to kill because we can't stand the thought that we're not alone at the top of the evolutionary ladder. My name is Dr. Martin Ashford. I was a linguist, specialized in dying languages, indigenous communication systems, the preservation of oral traditions before they disappeared forever. In 1979, I was 47 years old and working on a research project in Southeast Alaska, documenting the last speakers of a Tlingit dialect that existed only in one remote village. I'd spent my career studying how humans communicate, how language shapes thought, how the loss of a language is the loss of an entire way of understanding reality. I thought I knew what language was, what communication could be, what intelligence looked like. I was wrong about all of it. I had been staying in a small cabin about 15 miles from the nearest village, deep in the Tongass National Forest. My work required isolation, needed to record conversations without modern interference, needed informants to feel comfortable speaking in ways they might not in town where English dominated. So I lived alone, hiked in supplies once a week, spent my days with elders who remembered the old words. It was during one of these supply hikes that I first sensed I was being watched, not the normal forest awareness of animals observing a human passing through. This was different, focused, intelligent, sustained. For 3 weeks, every time I hiked that trail, I felt eyes on me, heard movements just beyond sight, found evidence that something large had been on the path ahead of me, broken branches at heights bears couldn't reach, footprints that were almost human but wrong in proportion. The elders noticed my unease. One, a woman named Mary who had to be 90 if she was a day, asked me directly, "You've felt the Kushtaka watching you, haven't you?" She used the Tlingit word I'd learned meant roughly land otter man, a creature from traditional stories. Part of their mythology, or so I'd thought. "What is Kushtaka?" I asked, using my academic voice ready to document folklore. She smiled sadly. "You whites always think our stories are metaphors. They're not. Kushtaka is real, has been here longer than us, longer than Tlingit people, longer than any human. He watches, he remembers. Sometimes if he thinks you're worth teaching, he speaks. My grandfather spoke with one, said it changed his understanding of everything, made him wise, made him sad. Both." I thought she was being poetic, describing some spiritual experience through traditional imagery. I thanked her, wrote it down in my notes, and dismissed it as beautiful mythology. 3 days later, I met Nathaniel, and learned that dismissing indigenous knowledge as just mythology was the first of many human arrogances I'd need to unlearn. I was recording bird calls. Part of my documentation process involved capturing all sounds of the environment, building a complete audio portrait of the linguistic landscape. I was standing in a small clearing, headphones on, holding my microphone toward a raven that was making particularly complex vocalizations. I was so focused that I didn't hear him approach, didn't sense his presence until his shadow fell over me. I turned, and there he was, massive, 9 feet at least, covered in fur that was silver gray with darker patches on the shoulders and chest, face that was neither quite human nor quite ape, something distinct, ancient, with bone structure that suggested a completely separate evolutionary path. And his eyes. God, those eyes. Deep brown, intelligent, and filled with something I could only describe as amused patience. "The raven is insulting you," he said in English. Perfect English. British accented English. "He's calling you the deaf one who records but never listens." Ravens have quite the sense of humor. I dropped my equipment, just let it fall from nerveless fingers as my brain tried to process what was happening. A Bigfoot, speaking English, with a British accent, making jokes about ravens. "You seem surprised," he continued, lowering himself to sit cross-legged on the ground so he'd be less imposing. "Though I can't imagine why. Your species has been documenting language and animals for decades. Whale songs, primate communication, bird dialects. Did you really think you were the only species capable of learning human language? How remarkably narcissistic." I tried to speak. Couldn't. My mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Every bit of my linguistic training, all my academic certainty about the uniqueness of human language, crashed down around me. He waited patiently. Then, "When you're ready to engage in dialogue rather than simply processing shock, I'll be here. I've waited this long. I can wait a bit longer." And he smiled. Actually smiled, showing remarkably human teeth in that not quite human face. That's how my conversation with Nathaniel began, with him sitting calmly in an Alaskan clearing, speaking English better than I did, waiting for my brain to reboot. And when it finally did, when I finally found my voice, the first thing I said was, "How?" His answer would take 6 hours, and change everything I thought I knew about intelligence, language, and what it means to be human. "How?" he repeated, settling more comfortably into his seated position. "How do I speak English? Or how do I speak at all? Or how am I capable of language in a form you recognize as sophisticated? Those are 3 different questions, Dr. Ashford. Yes, I know your name and they have 3 different answers. Which would you like first?" "You know my name," I said stupidly, still not quite accepting reality. "I've been observing you for 6 weeks. I've heard the villagers call you Dr. Ashford. I've watched you work with Mary and the other elders. I've listened to your recordings. You're a linguist, specializing in language preservation. You believe language shapes cognition. You're wrong about that, by the way, but we'll get to that later. Now, which question would you like answered first?" My training kicked in, academic mode. When confronted with the impossible, document it. How do you speak English specifically? Where did you learn it?" "I learned English from a Scottish trapper in 1632, he said casually, as if this were normal conversation. "James Morrison, decent man, drunk, but decent. He'd gotten separated from his expedition, broken his leg, was dying of exposure. I carried him to shelter, treated his injuries, kept him alive through winter. In exchange, he taught me his language. Took 3 months. I'm a quick study." 1632, I repeated. "You're saying you're 390 years old? Closer to 450, but who's counting? We age differently than you, live longer, think longer thoughts, have time to watch empires rise and fall. It's both a blessing and a curse. Mostly curse, honestly. Watching your species repeat the same mistakes century after century is exhausting." I sat down hard on the ground. My legs simply wouldn't hold me anymore. "This is impossible." "No, it's improbable. There's a difference. Impossible means it can't happen. Improbable means it's unexpected. My species' existence is improbable. My ability to speak your language is improbable." But we're here having this conversation, which means it's entirely possible. Your species struggles with this distinction. You confuse your expectations with reality. When reality contradicts expectations, you call it impossible rather than revising your expectations. Your species, I said, latching onto something concrete. How many of you are there? Globally? Maybe 800 in North America? Around 200 in this particular region of Alaska? 17. We're not numerous. Never have been. Long gestation periods, almost 2 years. Low infant survival rates. Territorial rather than social. Your species breeds like rabbits and spreads like infection. We breed slowly, live deliberately, occupy space rather than consume it. It's why you're inheriting the earth and we're disappearing. But if you can speak, if you're intelligent, why hide? Why not make contact? We could help. We could, he laughed. Actually laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling in a stream. Help? Dr. Ashford, do you know what your species does to intelligent beings that aren't human? You enslave them, you study them, you put them in cages, you kill them when they resist. Look at your own history. Look at how Europeans treated every indigenous population they encountered, killed them, stole their land, destroyed their cultures. And those were other humans. Now imagine what you'd do to us. No, hiding isn't cowardice. It's survival. We learned that lesson centuries ago. But that was the past. We're more civilized now. We have international law, human rights. We'd still kill us, he interrupted. Maybe more slowly, maybe with better documentation. But yes, you'd kill us. Some of you would hunt us for sport. Some would capture us for science. Some would exploit us for profit. A few of you might advocate for our protection, but you'd be outvoted by those who see us as threats or resources or roadblocks to development. We know. We've watched. We've seen what happens when your species discovers something rare and valuable. You don't protect it. You consume it. I wanted to argue, wanted to insist he was wrong. But I thought about elephants killed for ivory, rhinos for horn, old-growth forests for lumber, indigenous peoples for their land. He wasn't wrong. He was unbearably, undeniably right. So why reveal yourself to me? Why take this risk? He studied me for a long moment. Because you're different. You've dedicated your life to preserving languages that are dying. You understand that when a language disappears, an entire way of understanding reality disappears with it. You respect indigenous knowledge even when you don't fully understand it. You listen more than you speak. These are rare qualities in your species, I thought. Perhaps you could hear what I need to say. Perhaps you could understand. And perhaps, though this may be foolish hope, you could carry this knowledge and use it wisely. What knowledge? That you're not alone. That intelligence takes many forms. That language is not uniquely human. It's just uniquely yours. That consciousness exists on a spectrum, not a hierarchy. That your species' greatest weakness is your absolute certainty that you're the pinnacle of creation. You're not. You're one experiment among many. And honestly, you're not doing particularly well. Over the next hours, Nathaniel explained his species' understanding of language. They had their own, a complex system of vocalizations, gestures, and what he described as resonance communication that I still don't fully understand. But many of them learned human languages by observation, listening to humans for decades, learning patterns, teaching themselves grammar. Some, like Nathaniel, learned directly from humans in rare encounters. Others learned from multiple sources, picking up different languages, different dialects, building linguistic knowledge over centuries of watching. Language is easy, he said. Your species thinks it's complicated because you're stuck inside it. But from outside, patterns are obvious. Grammar is just rules. Vocabulary is just labels. The hard part isn't speaking your language. The hard part is understanding why you say what you say, why you lie so much, why you use language to obscure rather than illuminate, why you talk constantly but communicate so rarely. That's the real mystery of human language. Not how it works, but why you use it so poorly. He asked me about my work, listened carefully as I explained linguistic documentation. Then he said something that haunted me. You're preserving dead languages, recording the last speakers. That's noble. But you know what you're really documenting? Extinction. Every language you record is a testament to your species' failure to value diversity. You let these languages die, then you feel noble for recording them as they expire. It's like photographing a murder. The documentation doesn't undo the crime. So what should we do differently? I asked. Stop killing them. Actively preserve them while they're alive. Make space for multiple ways of knowing. Stop treating English as superior. Stop making indigenous peoples abandon their languages to participate in your economy. But you won't, because your species values efficiency over diversity, values conformity over uniqueness, values power over wisdom. So languages die, cultures disappear, and eventually, my species disappears, and yours is left alone, speaking one or two dominant languages, having lost all the other ways of understanding reality. Congratulations, you've won. You're alone at the top. How does it feel? Lonely, I said quietly. Yes, Nathaniel said. That's what I said at the beginning. You're the loneliest beings on Earth, and you did it to yourselves. We talked until the sun began to set. 6 hours. The longest, most profound conversation of my life. Nathaniel told me about his people's history, how they'd watched humans migrate into North America thousands of years ago, how they'd initially tried to coexist, even communicate, how early humans had sometimes accepted them, sometimes feared them, but generally left them alone. How that changed. The shift happened slowly, he explained. Your ancestors, the indigenous peoples who came first, they understood balance. They took what they needed, honored what they took, lived within the world rather than above it. We could coexist with them. Sometimes we even traded, shared knowledge. They had stories about us. We had stories about them. There was respect, if not friendship. But then others came. Europeans, with their diseases and guns and absolute certainty that land was something to be owned, that resources existed to be extracted, that anything not human was either livestock or pest. That's when we learned to truly hide. He described watching the destruction of indigenous cultures with grief that was palpable. We watched your people kill them, steal their children, outlaw their languages, destroy their ways of life. And we realized, if you could do that to other humans, what would you do to us? So we disappeared, became legend, became myth. Let your species believe we were impossible so they'd stop hunting us. But some humans still believe, I said. Still search. Yes. Believers are almost worse than skeptics. Skeptics leave us alone. Believers come looking with cameras and guns and need to prove they were right. They want evidence, want proof, want to capture and display us like trophies. They don't want to coexist. They want to possess. So we avoid them too. We avoid everyone. Until there's almost no one left to avoid. I asked him about language, my specialty, how his people communicated among themselves. He tried to explain, but some of it was beyond my comprehension. They had spoken language, yes, but also what he called deep speaking, communication through infrasound that carried emotional and conceptual content humans couldn't produce or fully perceive. Imagine, he said, if you could speak a word, and the listener would feel not just the definition but the entire emotional and experiential context of that word. You say tree, and I hear the sound. But if I deep speak tree, you'd feel the rootedness, the slow growth, the patient strength, the interconnection with fungal networks underground. That's how we communicate complex ideas. Your language is all surface, ours goes deep. Can you teach me? I asked eagerly. No. Your vocal cords can't produce the frequencies. Your hearing can't perceive them fully. It would be like teaching a blind person to paint by explaining colors. You lack the biological equipment. This is what I mean about language not being uniquely human. It's uniquely structured for human biology. Other species have languages equally complex, just differently structured. But your species can't accept that because you define language as what humans do, and then claim only humans have it. It's circular reasoning. He spoke about consciousness, about intelligence, about the human tendency to create hierarchies. Your species ranks everything: smarter, dumber, more evolved, less evolved, higher consciousness, lower consciousness. It's all nonsense. There's no hierarchy of consciousness, there's diversity of consciousness. A raven's consciousness isn't less than yours. It's different. It solves different problems, values different things, experiences reality differently. But you can't see that because you're trapped in the assumption that human consciousness is the template against which all other consciousness should be measured. But humans have achieved so much, I protested. Technology, art, science, and you've destroyed so much, driven thousands of species extinct, changed the climate, poisoned the oceans, created weapons capable of ending all life on Earth. Yes, you've achieved remarkable things, but achievement without wisdom is just elaborate destruction. A child with a hammer can achieve breaking windows. That doesn't make the child wise. He asked me about my work again, pressing deeper. Why did I care about dying languages? What drove me to document them? I tried to explain about preserving human knowledge, about cultural heritage, about the tragedy of loss. He listened, then said, "You care about human languages dying, but you don't care about species dying. You'll spend your career preserving words, but you won't preserve the beings who speak them. You'll record songs but let the singers disappear. You value the cultural product but not the culture itself. This is very human. Loving the artifact but not the life that created it." It stung because it was true. I'd spent decades recording languages but had done nothing meaningful to preserve the cultures and ecosystems that supported those languages. I'd been a documenter of extinction, not a preventer of it. "I'm sorry," I said. "You're right, I've been complicit." "Yes," he said gently. "But awareness is the first step. Most humans never reach awareness. They live and die inside their assumptions, never questioning whether they're destroying things that matter. You question. That's why I'm speaking to you, because questioning is the beginning of wisdom." As the light faded, Nathaniel stood. "I need to go. This has been pleasant. Unusual, but pleasant. I haven't had a conversation with a human in 40 years. I'd forgotten how exhausting it is. You think so fast and so shallow. It's like watching water bugs on a pond surface. Lots of movement, no depth." "Will I see you again?" I asked, desperate for more. "No," he said. "This was a gift, a one-time exchange. I wanted you to know we exist. Wanted you to understand what you're losing as we disappear. Wanted one human to carry the knowledge that intelligence is not uniquely yours, that language is diverse beyond human imagination, that consciousness exists in forms you can't perceive. What you do with that knowledge is your choice. Tell others and they'll call you crazy. Keep silent and the knowledge dies with you. Either way, my people continue disappearing. But at least you'll know. At least one human will understand what's being lost." "Why me?" I asked. "Why choose me to tell this to?" He looked at me with those deep, ancient eyes. "Because you listen. Because you value preservation over exploitation. Because you're dying. Not immediately, but I can smell it. Cancer. Early stage. You probably don't know yet. You have maybe 15 years, I thought. Perhaps in those 15 years, you'd find a way to share this that doesn't endanger us but enlightens your species. I don't have much hope. But I have some." Then he was gone. Disappeared into the darkening forest with that impossible silence his kind had perfected, and I was left sitting in the clearing, my recorder forgotten on the ground. My entire understanding of reality shattered and rebuilt. He was right about the cancer. I was diagnosed 6 months later. Been fighting it ever since, and I've spent 45 years trying to figure out how to honor the gift he gave me without endangering his species. I packed up my research 2 weeks after meeting Nathaniel and returned to civilization. Tried to continue my normal work. Tried to pretend nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Every conversation with a human felt shallow. Every academic debate about the nature of language felt absurd. How could I discuss Chomsky's theories of universal grammar when I'd met a being whose language operated on principles human biology couldn't even produce? I told no one. Not my colleagues. Not my wife. Not my closest friends. Kept the secret the way Nathaniel had asked. But it poisoned my career. I couldn't write papers anymore without thinking about how limited our understanding was. Couldn't teach classes on language evolution without wanting to scream that everything we thought we knew was wrong. Couldn't attend conferences without feeling like a fraud participating in humanity's collective delusion about our uniqueness. My wife noticed. "You've changed," she said one night. "Ever since Alaska. Something happened there. You won't talk about it. You're distant. Distracted. What happened to you?" "I learned something that I can't unlearn," I said. "And it's made everything else seem less important." She thought I was having a spiritual crisis. In a way, I was. But not the kind she imagined. She couldn't understand why I suddenly wanted to leave academia, wanted to work on conservation instead of linguistics, wanted to spend my time protecting habitats rather than documenting dying cultures. We divorced 5 years later. Amicable but sad. She deserved someone fully present. I was forever in that clearing, replaying 6 hours of conversation that no one would believe. I did shift my work toward conservation, used my academic credentials to transition into environmental advocacy, worked on habitat protection, fought development in old-growth forests, pushed for wilderness preservation, never explaining why it mattered so much, never revealing what I was really protecting. But people noticed my passion, thought I'd become a zealot. Maybe I had. The cancer came as predicted. 15 years after meeting Nathaniel, almost to the month. Started in my lungs, spread slowly. I've been managing it for 30 years now. Modern medicine has kept me alive far longer than Nathaniel predicted. Long enough to see so much habitat destroyed. Long enough to watch the wild places shrink. Long enough to wonder if his species is still out there or if I spoke with one of the last. I tried twice to find him again. Went back to Alaska. Hiked those same trails. Called out using the name he'd given me. Nothing. Either he'd moved on or he was staying hidden. I don't blame him. He'd taken a risk speaking to me once. Why do it again? But his words stayed with me. About loneliness. About how humans had isolated themselves at the top of a hierarchy of our own making. About how we valued achievement over wisdom. About how we were so certain of our superiority that we'd destroyed everything else rather than share the world. I watched it happen. Watched species go extinct. Watched indigenous languages die as I documented them dying. Watched wild places get developed. Watched the climate change. Watched everything Nathaniel had predicted come true. And I carried the knowledge that someone had been watching. Someone intelligent and ancient and deeply sad had witnessed our species' trajectory and tried to warn one human that we were on the wrong path. I wrote about it obliquely. Published papers on alternative consciousness frameworks. Wrote about the importance of recognizing non-human intelligence. Advocated for rights for great apes. For cetaceans for any being showing signs of complex cognition. Never mentioned Bigfoot. Never explained why I suddenly cared so much about protecting beings we'd previously treated as property or pests. My colleagues thought I'd gotten soft, emotional, unscientific. But I knew that intelligence took forms we couldn't recognize because we'd defined intelligence as what humans do. Knew that consciousness existed on spectrums we couldn't measure. Knew that language was far more diverse than linguistics acknowledged. Knew that we were surrounded by minds and meaning we refused to see, because seeing them would require admitting we weren't alone, weren't supreme, weren't the pinnacle of evolution. The hardest part was the isolation, carrying knowledge I couldn't share. Understanding reality in ways I couldn't communicate. It was like being fluent in a language no one else spoke. I'd have conversations with people about intelligence or consciousness or language, and I'd know things they didn't know, Couldn't tell them how I knew, couldn't bridge the gap between their understanding and mine. I aged into irrelevance, retired from teaching, focused on writing and advocacy, grew old watching the world change in exactly the ways Nathaniel said it would, and wondered constantly, was I honoring his trust by staying silent, or betraying his hope that I'd find a way to enlighten humanity without endangering his kind? I'm 73 now. The cancer is winning. Doctors say 6 months, maybe less. So I'm breaking my silence. Not to prove Bigfoot exists, I don't care if you believe me. But because Nathaniel asked me to carry knowledge, and I've carried it for 45 years. Now, I pass it on. A talking Sasquatch stood before me in 1979, spoke perfect English, discussed philosophy, linguistics, consciousness. His story is almost impossible to believe, but it's true, and what he taught me matters more than whether you accept it. He taught me that intelligence isn't uniquely human. We just defined intelligence to match what we do well. Abstract reasoning, tool use, language. But intelligence takes infinite forms. Nathaniel's people had intelligence focused on different things: reading ecosystems, deep time thinking, emotional resonance. Not better, not worse, different. We can't recognize it because we've decided only human-style intelligence counts. He taught me that language is just one communication system among many. His people had vocalizations, gestures, and deep speaking, infrasound carrying emotional content. I couldn't perceive it fully. My biology lacks the equipment. That's the point. Language isn't universal, it's species-specific. But we've declared only our language really counts, then concluded we're the only linguistic beings. It's circular logic. He taught me about loneliness, how humans have systematically destroyed or hidden every other intelligent species on Earth. Killed the Neanderthals, domesticated wolves and apes and elephants, driven his people into extinction through habitat destruction and violence. We did this because we can't tolerate equals, can't share the world, need to be alone at the top. And now we are. And we're desperately lonely, searching for alien intelligence while mourning our isolation, never understanding we created it. I spent 45 years trying to honor his trust, stayed silent, protected his people through silence. But silence has costs too. In 45 years, I watched the habitat shrink, watched development spread, watched wild places disappear, watched everything that might have sheltered his species get destroyed. My silence didn't save them, just let them die quietly. I don't know if Nathaniel's people still exist. I've seen no evidence in decades. Maybe they've retreated so deeply into hiding they've erased their own traces. Maybe they're extinct. Maybe I spoke with one of the last. I'll die not knowing if the most profound conversation of my life was with a survivor or a ghost. What haunts me most is what he said about documentation, that I was recording extinctions, not preventing them, that I was photographing murders, not stopping them. He was right. I spent my career documenting dying languages, never asking why they were dying, never fighting the systems that killed them, just recording, preserving artifacts while letting the living cultures disappear. I did the same with him, recorded his words in my memory, carried them like artifacts, but did nothing to protect his people, didn't fight development in their territories, didn't advocate for habitat protection in ways that might have sheltered them, just documented the conversation and let them disappear. Maybe this testimony is the same failure, documenting extinction after it's too late, sharing knowledge when it can't save anyone, but it's all I have left. This story, this impossible conversation, this proof that we weren't alone, that intelligence existed in forms we refused to recognize, that we destroyed something irreplaceable while debating whether it existed. If you're reading this, you'll call me crazy, delusional, a dying old man creating fantasy to feel important. I understand. I'd think the same if someone told me this story. But ask yourself, what if it's true? What if intelligent beings existed alongside us, and we drove them to extinction through indifference and violence? What if we're alone now, not because we evolved to dominance, but because we killed everything that might have been our equal? What if the universe isn't empty of intelligence? What if Earth isn't either? What if we're just blind to it because we've defined intelligence so narrowly that we can't recognize it when it's standing right in front of us, speaking English, trying to teach us wisdom we refuse to learn? Nathaniel told me his people had been watching humans for thousands of years, watching us spread across the planet, watching us destroy habitat, watching us drive species extinct, watching us create weapons of mass destruction, watching us change the climate. And they concluded we were the loneliest beings on Earth. Not because we were alone, because we'd made ourselves alone, because we couldn't tolerate sharing the world with anything we couldn't control. He had hope, though. That's what I remember most. Despite everything, despite centuries of hiding, despite watching his people dwindle, despite knowing humans had already won, he had hope. Hope that some humans would listen, would learn, would choose differently, would recognize that superiority is lonely, that diversity is strength, that sharing the world is wiser than conquering it. I don't know if I fulfilled his hope. Don't know if carrying this knowledge 45 years and sharing it at the end means anything. Don't know if anyone will read this and change, but I know this. I met a being more intelligent than me, more articulate, more wise, and he wasn't human. And everything I thought I knew about intelligence and language and consciousness was wrong. A talking Sasquatch stood before me. His story is almost impossible to believe, but he was real. His people were real. And we let them disappear while arguing about whether they existed. That's my testimony, my confession, my warning. We are alone at the top because we killed everyone else, and loneliness is the price of supremacy. Nathaniel knew that, tried to teach me, and I'm trying to teach you. Whether you listen is your choice. But the silence is ending, the secret is told, and whatever happens next, at least one human testified. They were here. They were real. They were worth knowing. And we destroyed them anyway.